How do I advocate for my team when we disagree with other teams? Welcome to episode 7 of our Ask Me Anything series, where a team leader asks, I would like to get your insight on managing the conflicts with external team leaders. Specifically, I advocate for my team's position on certain subjects, but it might conflict with other teams' positions on where they stand. I see the other team's point of view, but if it is not the obvious solution, I push our team's opinion. What do you think? And so today I will share what I think, but more importantly, I will share a framework that you can use when you run into this situation as well. Now, before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about why does working with another team sometime feel like this? And so, if we haven't met before, I'm Stephanie Slocum. I'm the founder of Engineers Arising LLC. I worked as an employee and an engineer for 15 years before I founded my own company in 2018. And we are a leadership and communication coaching company that has a specialty with helping organizations that value women instead. And so I have worked both myself personally as well as across multiple types of organizations, including I actually last week, I wrapped up a 1-year volunteer stint as president and the first woman of ASCE Structural Engineering Institute. We have 30,000 members. And so when I say I understand in multiple contexts how this feels, this is from personal lived experience, not just client work. And so what I have found is that when we on one team find ourselves butting heads with other teams, other departments, there is usually one really, really common thing that's going on. And it's this. When the project and organizational success vision is not clear, or people on all the sides cannot articulate it, what happens is this results in unaligned actions by teams and departments. In other words, in the absence of a clear shared vision and mission of this is where we are going, this is what success looks like, it is only natural for teams and departments to start jockeying for their own needs, their own resources, because all the teams have a different definition of what success is and are literally pulling in different directions. So if you imagine we have success, 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 success in 4 different places pointing 4 different directions, this is what is happening within your organization when the vision for success and where the organization or the project is going, what does that success look like, is fuzzy if it's not clearly defined. Now, I shared a framework in episode 6, so the last video, the previous video in this series, around managing conflict, and I used a whole bunch of examples on the personal side. So if you individually are dealing with conflict, what do you do? And so we are going to build on this framework by using examples within this particular setting, teams dealing with external stakeholders, but we're going to build on this framework. And I'm not going to go explain the framework again in a lot of detail. If you want to go get more detail and more examples on it, go back to that episode. Instead, I'm going to focus on how do we apply this in this particular situation. And so there are 3 pieces to this framework. And this framework is all around what you say. So what you're seeing on the screen with leader response blueprint excerpts. So this is part of a framework within a bigger conflict response framework that I have built and that is battle tested with many clients. We don't have enough time to cover all of that without making this a 2-hour video. And so today we're just going through what do you say? And this is the piece from that with this particular application. And so the first step is acknowledge. And in this case, so when we are talking about individual conflict, we're acknowledging the other person. When we are talking about team conflicts, we need to make sure we acknowledge the other team. Now, keeping in mind that there are individuals on the team that make up the team, it's not the team as a whole. We can do this in a couple different ways, be it acknowledging the individual person that's saying the thing that you don't agree with on the other team, or we can also acknowledge the team as a whole or some combination of that. Now, the good news here is that in this particular instance, this leader has already said that they see the other team's point of view. So they've already made an effort to see that So that means all they have to do is acknowledge it. So acknowledgement of the other teams. I'm going to give you some examples of what that actually sounds like in a conversation, because this is not just nodding your head in agreement. It's actually saying the words, verbalizing that you acknowledge them. And so that might sound like, it sounds like these three things are really important to your team. Is that accurate? Or please confirm my understanding that the challenge from your perspective is share what they shared. And so when I say paraphrase and confirm, you're repeating back in your own words what you understand to be the challenge, the problem with this approach from the other team. Now, you're not going to do this just once in the conversation. Essentially, every time they bring up another challenge, you want to come back to this and acknowledge it before you go to your own idea. And I'll show you very precisely how to do that in a moment. The one piece of this I want to caution you on, because, just like watch a master football player will go watch tape replays of what they did on the field so they know what to do better next time. One of the things I often do with my coaching clients is we will watch replays of meetings they've been in. And one of the places this goes very wrong is if you acknowledge someone, but your tone of voice says, I am being dismissive, or this is definitely a leading question. You want to make sure that when you acknowledge the other person, the other team, that you are saying it in a tone of voice that says, I'm trying to understand where you're coming from. So rather than saying it, I'll give you an example of this, rather than saying, can you confirm my understanding is right? That you said, we have an issue with this particular user because here's what I see. And then you go down this path of, clearly you weren't trying to understand. You were just trying to give a prelude to what you were going to say. If instead you say it like this, please confirm my understanding that the challenge from your perspective is blah, blah, blah. Is that accurate? Do I understand? And pause and wait for them to confirm that or add to it before you add your idea. And again, I'll give you a very easy way, another framework to add on this, to share your idea in a moment. But the key here is to not say this. You want to say this in a positive, curious tone of voice. You do not want to say this in a dismissive tone of voice or a tone of voice that says, this is a leading question. And to be very clear on this, if you're like, oh, well, I don't know how I would teach myself to ask it in a curious voice. Like every technical skill you've ever learned and every leadership skill in the book, all this takes is practice. And so that is what the acknowledgement piece of this sounds like. Let's move to the focus piece. So we're going the AFQ framework. F is the second step and F stands for focus. So what we want to do is when the teams disagree, we want to focus by zooming out. And so the core question to ask here is, what does success look like for the project and the organization if we move forward in a positive, productive way? Now, sometimes you can just individually throw this question out there to the group, and then you will have a big discussion about it, and you'll move in a positive direction. I've actually led brainstorming sessions on the answer to this question when it is a large and complex project to get everybody on the same page. Because often what ends up happening is we learn that one team thinks success looks like this way, another team thinks success looks like this way, or every individual person thinks success looks differently. So it's worth the effort to get aligned, especially if there is a disagreement. And I want to note that trying to resolve a disagreement, if you do not know the answer to this question, will only cause more disagreement and more conflict. And the piece on the focus here is, okay, so I've absolutely had it happen where we were having a conversation and it was clear that some of the individuals within one group, we all agreed that this is what success looks like, but some of the individuals didn't actually agree with that. You are allowed to agree to disagree. The important thing is that you have some kind of consensus, even if it's just a majority consensus on what success looks like moving forward. Now, Once you have an idea of the answer to this question, there are two follow-on questions that go with this. And again, I'm giving you these two follow-on questions because if you are having kind of a group discussion about this, these next two questions will come up and are a natural next discussion point that, okay, we know what success looks like. Now let's go to what are we really solving for with the current challenge, keeping in mind that this is the success metric, and where can we find common ground in our thinking? So again, we are zooming out. And this zooming out thing becomes really important because we know typically conflicts start and escalate around some kind of minutia, like small detail. You did this, or you did that, or you did that. Making a concerted effort to zoom out, go to the big picture, it pulls people away from the finger pointing of blaming other people, and it brings alignment of, okay, like we have this conflict, but if we step back and look at this from the bigger picture, and then from that perspective say, okay, where do we want to go from here? That gives you a completely different perspective on how you handle the conflict. And it also helps people pull people themselves away from this very defensive posture where they're focusing on one tiny thing and maybe perhaps missing the bigger picture. Okay, I said a moment ago, I give you a very specific tool to help you when you are using, for example, the acknowledgement piece and you want to add on your idea. And this is the tool I want to share with you today. So it's called the Yes and tool. This comes from the world of improv. And I want to first contrast this with what we see happening in communication within a lot of meetings and a lot of STEM organizations. We often hear the words yes, but. And these are words that stop conversations and can escalate disagreements really, really quickly. And so I want to give you some examples, which you may have heard multiple times in different meetings throughout your career and life so far. So examples like, that's a good idea, but here's why it won't work. Yes, but we've already tried that. That's interesting, but have you thought about the technical implications for my team? I hear you, but I don't think you understand. Yes, but we don't have the resources for that right now. It's not a bad idea, but let's be realistic here. Yes, but what about obscure edge case? And my personal favorite, I don't mean to be offensive, but. Now, I'll pick on the last one for a moment, because as soon as someone says, I don't mean to be offensive, but, everything coming out of their mouth after that word but is going to be offensive. And that is what this word does. It comes across as dismissive, demeaning. It completely invalidates everything that comes before the word but. And remember, in the first step of this framework, we want to acknowledge the person. And so the word but, when we speak, does the opposite of that. It doesn't build the rapport or trust that we need to be able to resolve the conflict. To the point that while there are very few things I say that we should never do at work, just because oftentimes, these if you should never do that, that is very rarely true. Like there's very rarely things that are true in all situations, just like there's very rarely true things that are true in no situations. In this case, I'm going to make an exception because I actually think the word but should be eliminated from all communications. It's not helpful. It's dismissive. It escalates conflict. It is not a productive word to be doing. So if you remember nothing else from this AMA video response today, it's don't be a but. Because the word but, it escalates conflict and disagreements. It shuts down conversations. It's dismissive, and it discourages sharing of potentially innovative solutions. So if you work on a team that is somewhat or partially responsible for having innovative ideas or coming up with innovative solutions, the word but, when people hear that, they immediately think, why should I keep on sharing my ideas? Because I'm just going to get shut down. So the fix for this is to use yes and it's super simple. First, you're going to acknowledge, accept the idea. We already talked about, and yes, it's no accident that we talked about acknowledging the person. This tool allows you to do that very, very easily. Then you're going to build on it using either the word yes or a similar positive statement. I'll give you some examples in a moment. And then you're just going to rinse and repeat to keep the momentum going because creative energy multiplies. Now, let me give you some examples of what it looks like to say either straight up yes or a similar phrase that does the same thing. So you can say yes, but you could also say, that's a good idea. And we could, yes. And what if we also, that's great. And what I like about this is you're going to paraphrase, acknowledge their idea, and you'll add your idea. And I gave you this last one because it is one of the most useful options to use if you disagree with some or all of the idea. It allows you to acknowledge the other person without agreeing with them. And so this tool is an extremely effective tool. It is one I use on a daily basis nearly every time I'm talking to someone. And you can use it both in your professional communication, you can use it in your personal communication as well. And you can also use it to come up with innovative ideas if you're doing a team brainstorming session. Now, on the you communicating as an individual side, I actually have written an entire blog on yes and. So it goes a bit deeper into where the tool comes from, more examples that are outside of the team function that is the focus of this AMA video today. If you want to check that out, there's the blog link there, and I will also drop that into the video description. And so an example of this that you could use in a team setting, let's say during a project meeting, someone on the other team shares an idea that you do not think will work for your team. What do you say? And so here's how you could acknowledge and share your idea. You might say, yes, what I like about this idea is share the part you do like, and to make it work for our team, I suggest, and then you add your detail, your idea then. What if you don't have an idea, but you know it won't work? You might say something like this. What I like about this idea is share the part you do like, and I'd like to hear from the rest of my team on what would need to be true for this approach to work. So notice again, I didn't come out and say, I don't think that idea would work. And why don't I do that? In part because I suspect, so you are a super smart, talented STEM professional. That is my assumption if you're watching this video. I bet if you challenged yourself, you could find a way to make this idea work. And so knowing that, knowing you're in a room of smart people who can make a lot of different ideas work, the best approach when we're talking through ideas is to figure out, okay, what would need to be true for this approach to work? This is why I phrased it that way. And sure, after you have that discussion, everyone may come to a conclusion that, okay, well, these things that would need to be true, we have constraints right now that mean they are not possible. But you did it in a way that validated and acknowledged, yes, I heard the idea, maybe it didn't work, but I'm open to exploring that possibility with you. That is a core part of this acknowledging piece. I'll give you one other thing you might be able to say. I appreciate the out-of-the-box thinking with, paraphrase that idea. So with this one, I'm assuming this was like a completely left field, completely crazy idea. So you might say, I appreciate the out of the box thinking, and we should also consider this approach, share your idea, due to share reasoning on why this makes sense from a success outcome standpoint. And so this one I like to use if for whatever reason you are short on time in the meeting. Ideally, we'd like to have a lot of back and forth with this yes and concept when we are talking through different ideas, how we move forward from here. And sometimes you're coming up in the last couple of minutes of the meeting and you haven't gotten to a resolution yet. That's where number 3 can be super useful to redirect the conversation back towards what you talked about within the focus step of what is your shared outcome. Now, if you want to use this with a team, here are super simple rules for it. Basically, you go and use yes, and you set your timer for a certain length of time, let's say 5 minutes. And the only rules are you are brainstorming, you are not evaluating. Every response must accept and build on the previous response. And then you share what the variations are, you share what you can't do, and you just go around and brainstorm. and you give everybody permission to share their crazy ideas and just tell them, hey, we're going to write down all these ideas. We will come back and evaluate them later. Right now, your job is to just build on the ideas so we come up with the best and most innovative solutions. This is one of the things that I will facilitate and do with folks. And so if that's something you're interested in, you'll see my contact information within this video. Contact me about bringing a Yes and workshop into your organization to help you be more creative and innovative. Okay, so the yes and tool works really, really well within the acknowledge, within the focus area. And so now we need to talk about the question piece of this framework. And so within the AFQ framework, we want to end with a question. Now, if you go back and watch the previous video where I went into depth on each of these pieces, one of the things I shared is that asking questions engages the other person's executive function. It actually engages your own as well, so that you are able to come from a place where you can co-create a solution together, which is really, really important when it comes to how can you find alignment and a way to move forward in a conflict situation. When you are working with different teams, what you want to do is use the question to kind of reiterate what you decided with the focus piece about what does success look like. And so you might say something like, here's where we agree, share what you agreed on within the focus. What's your take on the next steps for both teams? Again, with the questions, not all questions are created equal. You don't want to ask a leading question, a yes or no question here. You want to ask a question that forces a future focus. And so often you can take this one verbatim. You want to ask a question that focuses on moving forward in a productive way, not rehashing whatever the tiny thing was that started the conflict in the beginning. That wraps it up for this AMA video on how to manage conflict with external team leaders. If you've missed any of the videos in this AMA series, you can see descriptions to all of them so far up on the screen, and we will drop links in below this video in the video description so you can go check them out. Today, we just wrapped up conflicts with external team leaders, and next time we'll be talking about how do I build influence while serving my team.